Hello and welcome back to the lab. Today on the bench we have a question and answer video from a viewer about this thing. So, before we get started in this video, I need to tell you guys, I am, at least from the state and local municipality that I live in and am under the jurisdiction of, I am woefully unqualified to talk about this subject. I hold none of the licensure needed to install these systems, deal with these systems, talk about these systems. The only thing I can do is be adjacent while someone else is working on them and assist in ways that I can, and have been for a fair number of these in various different environments. I've been around fire suppression systems in kitchens, server rooms, industrial buildings, industrial complexes, things of that nature. So I've dealt with various types of fire suppression. In specifics, the user was asking about, or the viewer was asking about automated fire suppression systems for the home lab. And that is a incredibly deep topic that, well, frankly, the powers that be in the jurisdictions that I live in say I am unqualified to talk about. So take this video as information only. This is not to be used as a guide or any other such action. I could just give you some of the knowledge that I've gained from working around these systems and things like that, but I am not qualified to install them, talk about them, and really work on them. I work adjacent to them. I don't work on them. And I have never done said, so I know the limits of the licensures that I hold, and they do not include fire suppression. Also, I'm a guy on the internet talking about how to prevent a fire, so take that with a grain of salt, and do with this information what you will. Sorry about the fairly long-winded disclaimer on the front of this video. Fire suppression and automated fire systems are topics that are incredibly sensitive and are incredibly nuanced, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, what the use case is of the space, as well as are there employees, is it a private space, things like that. Everything changes depending on the answer to those questions. So it's absolutely critical that if you're thinking about putting one of these systems in, that you get somebody who holds the proper licensure and can guide you through the process to get it installed, tested, and certified correctly. Especially around a remodel, fire suppression is one of the things that, unless I get a passing permit, I'm not allowed to let people back in the building. So it is something that is incredibly critical and is taken quite seriously in the jurisdictions that I roam. So, and worst case scenario, if something goes wrong with the system, you can be put on fire watch, which means the last time it was explained to me, an individual had to be on site 24 hours a day and had to walk the facility every 20 minutes just to make sure there wasn't a fire when the automated system maybe hadn't been certified or something like that. So it can be wildly inconvenient when one of these systems needs service and is therefore out of service. But that's true for most systems that govern life and health. This is fire systems and automated fire suppression systems are a life-saving piece of technology and equipment, and are treated with the care of a system that does have someone's life on the line. Specifically, the automated suppression systems. One of the problems with fire suppression systems is a lot of them function by removing the oxygen from the room. That's not great for the people that are there. So when one of these systems goes off, well, it can be hazardous to the people that are involved. They're also absolutely messy. When one of these systems goes off, depending on what the retardant chemical is, I believe this is a powder fire extinguisher, and we can see it does have pressure. This one's ready to go. This is what I have on the bench. But this is, this is a dry chemical extinguisher. So if I let this go, dry chemical powder. If I let this go here in the lab, it is going to create a giant, giant mess. So the thing with fire and fire suppression system is As with everything, an ounce of prevention is worth 10 pounds of cure. It's better to have the fire not start in the first place than have to deal with it after it's started. So, in terms of, I guess the real question is, where is this going? The viewer to the channel was interested in setting up a calibration lab at home and noted a comment that I had of a calibration lab typically leaves some of the standards on 24/7. He was worried about one of the standards catching on fire and starting a fire in his structure. Not going to say it can't happen. It absolutely can. But the standards themselves are kind of low energy. So as you get further away from the breaker panel, the energy available and the safety features start getting layered. It would take a lot. And in my areas, dry powder, CO2, there's a liquid chemical for grease fires in the kitchen. We have sprinkler systems, which is just a deluge system. The sprinklers goes off and everything floods. I mean, the amount of water that comes out of those systems is absolutely incredible. Does its job, puts the fire out, everything's good to go. However, if it's in a technology room like a lab, something like that, the water can do huge amounts of secondary damage. Obviously, the goal is to put the fire out, but you've taken a lot of very sensitive electronic equipment and soaked it, which isn't great. Same thing is true for server rooms, things like that. In the municipalities and the latitudes where I'm at, code does require the sprinkler systems to be dry pipe. So the way that works is there's no water in the sprinkler pipes, and I don't have sprinkler heads around me because I don't work on these systems, but there's a glass vial in the sprinkler head that is set to a temperature, and when that glass vial exceeds that temperature, it bursts, opens the valve, the air rushes out of the pipe, water rushes in, and sprinklers just deluge the fire and put it out. Some of the stuff we have in server rooms is CO2 and halon. So you can get a CO2 fire extinguisher. Those tend to be very, very cold because you're releasing CO2 gas very rapidly. And if you're standing in front of it, you don't want to stand in front of it, first off, but they can get incredibly cold. And they put the fire out by displacing the oxygen with CO2, as well as cooling things off. The problem with displacing the oxygen is the humans need the oxygen as well, which is also true for a halon system. Some of the server rooms that I've been in that have had halon systems, they have an alarm that went off X seconds before the halon system discharged, and if that alarm went off, everybody dropped what they were doing and you got the hell out of the room. That was specifically so you didn't suffocate, because the whole goal of that fire suppression system was to fill up the room with halon. Halon was safe for the computers, but it displaced all the oxygen, got it out of the room, and if anything was burning in there with no oxygen, it would self-extinguish. However, being a person that needs to breathe, a room full of halon is immediately hazardous to life and health. So it's why there is some of those systems. The other thing, too, is some of those systems, not only do they need to be installed correctly, permitted, inspected, and tested, they do tend to be somewhat costly, and the rules are radically different if the building is an employer versus a private, say, residence. I'm not aware of anybody that I can think of that has had a sprinkler system or some form of automated fire suppression system installed in a residence. Most commercial buildings will come with at least a deluge system, as is code around here, but when it comes to private residences, can't think of any. My fire suppression system is this fire extinguisher here for the lab, so I do not have an automated fire suppression system here, but I take the precautions on the other side of the fence. So we don't push any of the wiring, we don't let anything get hot, monitor everything, appropriate breakers. The wall that feeds the lab has 4 20-amp circuits in it. I've talked a little bit about the way the building's wired. It was wired, inspected, and done to code to my municipality, and is actually overbuilt. There's 4 circuits coming down the wall. And each circuit has 3 outlets on it. Those outlets do tie into power strips, but the power strips are not daisy-chained, and those feed the equipment on the bench. As you get closer and closer and closer to the standard, you'll get to... So in the breaker panel, we have the main breaker. appropriate gauge wire that goes to the receptacle. The receptacle is properly rated for the gauge of wire. The power cord for the standard is beefy. Once you get into the standard, you have the fuse in the standard. You have, and that's about the end of it. So the fuse is the first line of defense. If anything goes sideways in the standard, the fuse pops and cuts power to the unit. If the fuse fails for some reason, power gets continued. The breaker should trip if you have it in a power strip, especially if it's a lower amperage surge protector. So if I was super concerned about it, let's say I have a 20 amp circuit feeding the standard, I could put a 5 amp power strip on it. The power strip will trip out at 5 amps. They'll also trip out from heat. So if something goes catastrophically wrong and the standard shorts out, should trip the power strip before it trips the main breaker. The main breaker should trip if there's a catastrophic failure. The breaker's there to save the wire. It's not there to save a person. So breakers are not life-saving devices. But in terms of a fire risk, the biggest risk is actually arcing connections. So if you have a connection that's sizzling, if you have a socket that's loose, if you have a socket that's sizzling, these are some of the bigger risks of fire, as opposed to just leaving a device on 24/7. Arcing gets incredibly hot, borderlining on a plasma, and it can very easily start a fire. So tight connections, new outlets, nothing loose, things like that. All of this is good for keeping the systems functioning normally, not overloading the circuits, being conscious of how much you're drawing through an individual surge strip, things like that. Nice thing about the DC standards that we're talking about, we're actually talking about a 343A. Doesn't draw a lot of current, so the odds of it melting down and starting a fire are fairly low. That is to say, leaving stuff plugged in, doing things overnight leaving things plugged in unattended and on is always a risk. It's one of the reasons why I overbuild things here in the lab. Make sure we use properly or overrated components. Things like that is specifically so fire is not necessarily a problem. One of the bigger modern fire risks in today's world are these things. These are power banks for cell phone chargers, things like that. These are, when these go sideways, they are incredibly flammable. The hydraulic press channel probably has one of the best videos, and I actually use it as a public service announcement when I need to show somebody the potential for something to go sideways. He laid out a bed of screws and set this on top and then crushed it, and it blew a 6-foot fireball through his shop and really went out in a big way. These two are in great shape, but I do not leave these things charging overnight. I know an engineer, unfortunately, he had an incident where he left one of these charging on his kitchen counter and it cooked off and it actually took out his house, burned to the ground. So absolutely, these lithium packs, don't leave these plugged in and charging overnight. Or I should say, don't leave those charging unattended. The other thing that's true about those lithium packs too is you can't throw those away. The trash company uses compactors, and odds are good something's going to punch through it. And if there's more and more often, trash trucks are actually starting to catch fire because of improper disposal of lithium power packs. This is one that has a problem, so let's see if we have gotten rid of this battery yet or not. I don't think so. The other one that was surprising that happened to me recently was I had an old cell phone that was just acting really dumb, and it started, it blew up so much it actually pushed the screen off and cracked the screen. It had to go. Yeah, that one's starting a little bit. This one's not actually too bad. So, with all of that being said, no production facility, lab, workshop, environment, garage can be made 100% safe. As a fellow YouTuber absolutely says, I like to have fun in dangerous ways, and I do. But I keep a healthy respect for the risks, acknowledge my limitations and my limits of knowledge, work on the limits of knowledge where they need to be. My limitations, as long as I can stretch them, we'll work on those as well. But there are some things where even I ask for help from experts in a different field because I may not know something. And especially with some of this stuff, it is totally okay to be the dumbest person in the room, because sometimes being the dumbest person in the room and asking the stupid questions, you're guaranteed to learn something, and you might find out you kind of don't want to stick your hand in front of the the X-ray emitter. So there's everybody's learning all the time. We can mitigate the risks in the lab by building things sensibly, using parts within their ratings, over-engineering systems from the start. In my municipality, building code is just that, a minimum standard. Nothing says I can't build over a minimum standard. If they say I need 12 gauge, or if they say I need 16 gauge wire for 5 amps coming out of the wall, and I put 12 gauge wire on it, well, the wire's not going to heat up, and it'll run like that all day and not have a problem. So we can always over-engineer something, and for high reliability, that's done, including redundancy of systems and things like that. So that's something that's fairly common. And the other thing too is, especially with fire safety in some of these systems, fire safety and arc flash specifically, an ounce of prevention is worth 10,000 pounds of cure. All of these fire suppression systems they function, they work very, very well. They make a huge mess until you get into the gaseous ones, halon and CO2. But the powder fire extinguishers, they make a huge mess. Water gets everywhere, gets into everything. If the goal is to have a small fire, the task is to keep it from getting out of hand. If the goal is to not have a fire, the task is to make it not start in the first place. So an ounce of prevention is worth 10,000 pounds of cure. Keep it from kicking off in the first place, over-engineer everything, work within limits, and respect design limitations on the things you're working with, and everything should go pretty well. Thanks for stopping by the lab and taking a look at the more than you ever wanted to know about fire suppression from somebody who was woefully untrained. If you like what you're seeing, hit all the YouTube buttons, like, share, and subscribe. If you want some additional content, check out the Patreon page. Patreon support, as always, is greatly appreciated. Helps keep the lights on here in the lab and videos coming up to YouTube. If you have anything to add, hit up the comments section down below. I read all the comments in between all the videos. Love talking to everybody in the comments, and I will see everybody in the next video. Bye for now.